Welcome to the Norris Group Real Estate Podcast, a show committed to bringing you insights from thought leaders shaping the real estate industry. In each episode, we'll dive into conversations with industry experts and local insiders, all aimed at helping you thrive in an ever-changing real estate market, continuing the legacy that Bruce Norris created, sharing valuable knowledge, and empowering you on your real estate journey. Whether you're a seasoned pro or a newcomer, this is your go-to source for insider tips, market trends, and success strategies. Here's your host, Craig Evans.
Welcome, everybody, to the Norris Group Real Estate Podcast. For the last 6 weeks, we've been running the I Survived Real Estate 2024. We hope you enjoyed it, and we thought today we'd do something a little different and do a little recap show and get Craig's thoughts on this. So welcome, Craig Evans, to the show.
Good to be back on this side of it for a little bit.
Yeah. So, Craig, in 2023, we told everybody when Bruce was retiring that this was going to be the last I Survived Real Estate. But obviously we came back in 2024. Why did you bring it back?
You know, Joey, honestly, that was a process that, for me, taking the Norris Group over, a lot of it was really more about the legacy of what the company had been about before, and I know that two things. This was an event that was very near and dear to Bruce and also Aaron's heart, right? For the charity side of that and what it meant to the community. And you know my heart on the legacy piece of why I did the transaction with Bruce on taking over the Norris Group. And I just didn't feel like it would be right, one, to just end it, right? I felt like if we're going to really carry on a legacy, that's one of the ones that we wanted to continue and to see how we can grow that and even just make it better and better every year.
What does that word legacy mean to you personally?
Boy, you know, as a dad, I never thought a lot about legacy until I started, you know, probably the last 15 years or so of my life, right? And it was about the time that we started having children, and I started looking at, well, and I've done all these things in life, and that's great. Maybe that's a quote unquote name for me. But what does that mean to those that I leave behind, right? Whether it's my family, all the people that work on our company, the community, what we stand for in the community. And so legacy for me really about 15 years ago for me and Stephanie, my wife, you know, it really started taking on a new role about what do we do within this world and the time that we're given on this earth to do something that stands the test of time after we're gone. What do we do that really matters in life? And this is one of those things as my companies as a whole, but especially this event, what it has meant to the community and to people in the past, that legacy of doing something that matters, I felt like that was the thing that needed to continue, because it matters. You know, how many of the Make-A-Wish kids have we ever had to the event? Right? We've never seen them. We've seen pictures, right? But we don't get to see the effect that we actually have on people's lives. But knowing that we do things that changes someone's life, I think that's some of the most impactful and the best stuff you can do on this earth, you know?
Yeah, I think that's what the Norris Group has been known for, you know, as they follow Bruce. Changing the trajectories of people's lives is probably the most impactful thing that we can do, and that's what we hope to continue to do as a company as a whole. So how was it hard? Was it hard to prepare for this event?
Oh, well, you know, you and I spent a lot of time going through stuff because, you know, how do you ever become good enough to walk behind Bruce Norris, right?
You don't.
Exactly. That's it. Right. So I knew that I can't compete. I don't need to try to be Bruce Norris. I just had to figure out how to be myself. But I knew that there were expectations of all the hundreds of people walking into that room about what that had been in the past. Right. So I knew there was big shoes to fill.
Well, in that regard, the format changed. We did the format a little bit different, and that why was that important to you?
I think we had a kind of a moment that we've got to say, okay, while Bruce and them have done this 17 years, I needed people to see that, hey, while I want this legacy to go on, I've got visions for what I want this to be. And I wanted to start crafting and shaping what that looks like.
One of those things that was the change in format. We were accustomed to Bruce just standing at a podium and giving us the economic update. You guys did it more as a Q&A, almost a fireside chat, like the rest of the panels. Was there anything that Bruce told us in your interview that surprised you?
Well, Bruce and I had been talking for several months about the things that were coming up. So I don't know that there was things he told me that surprised me. One of the things that I think I was glad to hear him talk about that I think is most often missed. We were looking for the most part on a national scale of what the charts read. We were looking between California and Florida, and then we talked about several other, if you want to call them sub-markets, but really not other sub-market. I mean, Dallas is not a sub-market, but as he started to talk about if you want to call them sub-products and the sub-market of how, at points you can have too much of a good thing sometimes. And I was glad to hear him say that. And maybe if I want to say surprise, that was probably the only thing that really surprised me that he talked about, was because most people don't want to talk about that process that, hey, but the reality is, if you've got too many of a 1,500 square foot home in a certain mile radius and the absorption rate is not going to cover that, that's a key that a lot of investors don't focus on, right? So I loved that he did push that out and was encouraging people to look at, listen, what is it that we're buying? What is it that you're putting on the market from an investment standpoint? Because I think that's a big key that a lot of times people miss, is understanding it's not just about 3 beds, 2 baths, attached, detached, 1 car, 2 car garage. It's not just about that stuff, but you got to dig deeper in some of the markets to see, are there different subcategories of product that are going to do better than others? And sometimes you can have too much of a good thing in that sub market,
So not to take anything away from any of the other panels, the investor panel was my favorite. And I think, and the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of people, they got tons of takeaways. Did you have a favorite moment from that panel?
Wow. I think the moment, although I think it probably maybe shocked his wife a little bit, I think the moment that Bill started to get very raw and transparent about his past and what the business almost did to his family because of only focusing on drive. To me, that was very impactful. In settings like that, most people they just want to talk about the positives and look at me and look how great we are. And I love the vulnerability of someone in that status to be able to stand up and say, hey, guys, I wasn't perfect either. And I almost lost it all, over what I was trying to build.
Just to recap for folks, just in case you missed that episode, what Craig is talking about is Bill admitting to entering into a covenant with his wife about the way he was going to run the business, and then talking about how he didn't renew that covenant year after year after year. And as the business grew and required more of Bill, he just took it for granted and didn't really understand how much he had taken it for granted until she asked him for a divorce. And that was like just the realest thing. And you see like Bill, like up there almost crying. And it was weird from the standpoint, I was sitting next to his wife when he did it. Like I was I was just kind of making my ways, and she was just like, just intently, you could just tell that they didn't discuss this at all. And it was just the realest moment I think I've ever seen at I Survive Real Estate, And so I thought that was probably one of my favorite moments too, because in this world of the internet, Facebook, Instagram, you always think everybody's just killing it and everybody's just got nothing but good times. But what we wanted from this panel was to tell people that you're going to make mistakes and it's okay as long as you don't give up and you keep moving forward and you keep learning. I think that was one of the biggest things that this panel in particular gave all of us. Now, you started by asking,
Joey, the thing about that for me that hit me on that was, Stephanie never asked me for divorce, but boy, we had just been through that a year earlier of like, hey, Craig, we didn't talk about that we're going to push this hard, and so I loved it. The reality is, Joey, it was comforting knowing I'm not the only guy in the room that's made that mistake. And I think that's a lot of value that groups like what the Norris Group fosters and that type of community is showing that, listen, one, we're all flawed at times, right? We're not perfect people. But man, knowing that you've got people that either you can learn from and or like, man, I'm not the only one that's done that kind of boneheaded move, right? Yeah, that was just a very real moment for me. It was tough to stay up there and not choke up thinking about everything that was going on with him and his family in the past, and knowing that had been my situation as well, not to that extreme. That was a very powerful moment that I didn't expect that, and I was grateful that he was willing to be that vulnerable.
You just touched on something that made me think of, we were just at the Collective Genius event just a little over a week ago. And you talked about not being the only one right now.
Yep.
And that's almost exactly what the Collective Genius is there to do is, when you're part of this community, which will next week when we interview the CEO, we'll learn a lot more, but that's
shameless
part of
plug
what
for Jason today.
That's what's great about that community is that, if you have a big inefficiency or something you're not doing great, there's somebody in that room that is, and they're willing to help you get through that, share resources, and help you be successful in any way they can. So with that being said, you asked right off the bat about inefficiencies, and you got 3 different answers, but all of them were focused on 2 things: finding things that investors aren't willing to do, and then number 2, being prepared to pivot when the rest of the industry catches up. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's so much that we do in our businesses, in running the amount of stuff that we do. Efficiency is the key to what we do, right? And we don't always succeed, right? I mean, there's days where you're like, man, did we just graduate from kindergarten in this class? I mean, what are we doing, right? So I was anxious to hear, other guys that are extremely successful in their own rights, and what they do as to how they handle efficiencies, and it was so interesting to see and hear the aspect of the understanding of the time to pivot, right? Because that was the one thing that we've been looking at for a year and a half, of understanding how to maneuver the markets as they've been doing the last 2 years. And I was so excited to hear them discuss that and talk about that, and what that meant to their business from a sustainability, and from an efficiency standpoint, to know whether it's personnel, whether it's business model, whatever their standing was, right? Mark De La Torre, that was on the panel that night, he and I had talked some and have talked since about a lot of stuff. And that's one of the things that we've talked about is even the understanding of pivoting with personnel, when you've got people that are such a vital part of what you do, sometimes it's super difficult to kind of segregate those two and say, well, wait a minute, I love this person, care deeply for them. They've been great in their role, but my business has now grown to a point to where it's no longer efficient having that person in that role, right? And how do we pivot that person into something else that benefits them and the company? And that's just one component of it. But I think understanding that is just a key factor in running a business, especially with the last 4 years of what we've been through with one administration, the prior years of that, what we're about to go into. There's a lot of things that you've got to manage as a leader to look at efficiencies. And I think that understanding how to pivot is so key. And I was very glad to hear those guys talk about that and their experience within pivoting,
Well, they both talked about understanding and knowing the numbers and being completely honest with what you're seeing and not getting emotional about it. That's when the leadership conversation really steps in. What stood out about their opinions on leadership?
Well, all right. So that you just said a word, not getting emotional about the numbers, right? I don't care whether you're a brand new investor or a brand new business owner, a brand new widget maker, whatever it is, right? Or if you're seasoned for 30 years. I think one of the hardest things to ingrain in and develop self-discipline is not being your own hype man, right? It's super easy to be that own hype man, and everything we see and the ideas and all this, every one of them's great, and every house is great, and this is the best deal we're ever going to put together, and all of a sudden, we don't look at the reality of, man, these numbers don't pencil out. We're not willing all the time to look at what the real numbers tell us, right? So I go back to Bruce. The data doesn't lie, right? I love that about Bruce. When I'd never thought about it that way, but when Bruce first taught me about looking at data, don't ever look at it and try to prove a point. Let the data tell you what it is, and you got to be able to accept it. So I think that key that you said, the emotional component, I think that's one of the hardest things sometimes to work through and get over. But to maintain that discipline is a huge key to success.
I don't know who it was. I think it might have been Bill, but he was talking about we're going to almost live and die in the margins.
That's right.
And that leads me to the next question.
But in tying that back, those are the hard things that leaders have to do. If you're going to be a good leader, you've got to be able to step outside of that realm and recognize that. And I think that's what I think both those guys portrayed that and showed that very well that night. That's the reason they're successful in what they do, is because they disassociate from the emotion when it comes to that leadership side, because they understand that, listen, sometimes it's going to mean making hard decisions,
Bill talked about principles, strategies, and tactics. And he talked about the willingness of an investor to exit a little too early rather than just get stuck in that scenario that you just talked about. Now, how hard is that when you're a new investor?
Yeah, I think the two phases of a new investor are, we hear so much. There's so many people that are writing books and doing the seminars and the webinars about how to get into real estate. And one of the biggest things they're talking about, got to get deals going, got to do deals. And you do have to do deals. But doing the wrong deal just because it's a deal going doesn't mean we'll never make it the right deal, And so that front end basis for the new investor is a big key. But understanding when to exit is right behind it, is that second number that most new investors struggle with. Just like my buddy, that it's not real estate, it was the market, but they look at it and they say, boy, I've had great cash flow for this time period, and that they may not want to exit that product, but they miss the fact that, hey, this product is now about to be 12 years old, and my CapEx is starting to increase because I got to have a new roof put on next year. And so, a lot of times the newer investors aren't looking at the fact that, I've cash flowed great for 2 years, but if that thing's only cash flowing, $300 a month or $400 a month, 1 year isn't going to pay for a roof, right? So understanding those things and looking at, one, when they buy, but two, when to exit. Those are keys for young investors. Are they moving too soon, or are they not moving soon enough, right? That the whole exit strategy is, I believe, where a lot of young investors struggle to know what that is.
I want to talk about the economic panel a little bit. This year was dominated by two major factors, inflation, but the interest rate conversation really dominated the conversation. Do you think that's going to be the biggest driver of real estate in 2025?
So me personally, we just had Fed rate dropped another 25 basis points yesterday. I don't know that we're going to see a big move on the market because of that at this point. But I think there's going to be three things that will be big drivers for 2025. I do think the first will be interest rates, depending on where they go. And there's a lot of things that back into that as far as what the Fed does and how that relates, obviously, to bonds. The Fed really changed under Powell. The Fed changed the way they operate and what they're looking at. And Powell's main focus and how he was driving the Fed when he came in was really focusing on the aspect of unemployment first and then inflation second, right? We're in an aspect where he's driving down inflation, but we've still got really good numbers on employment for the most part. So I think he's got a tricky job ahead of him over the next year. I think he's out in May of 26. So this is his last full year. So I think that's going to be a big play of what he does, all in line with what is this administration. This administration is laying out some lofty goals of what they want to achieve. Last Friday, I think the 30-year fixed was 5.875. Was the lowest rate I saw last Friday. Yesterday, even after the rate drop, FHA rates, lowest rate was at 5.5, was the lowest I saw. So, when you're looking at those things and you're saying, hey, we've come from an 8 down to now we're touching into the 5s. I know the average rates, because there's other lenders that are up in the 6s, but you're starting for the first time with no buy downs to see numbers in the 5s. Bruce and I have been talking for years, the last 2 years now. Once we start seeing stuff in the 5s again, product's going to move, right? Well, that starts to free up that liquid capital that people have to spend. I still think we've got let me back up, Joe, and answer that. Rates are going to be number one. I think that's going to be the number one. I think that the second thing that will drive that will be in inventory status, right? What's the inventory look like on the market and the amount of it? Because right now, it looks like we've got tons of it in certain markets. But as soon as you start to see optimism happening, because there's an emotional component to buying real estate, whether you're buying for investments or you're buying as Main Street, buyers to live in, there's an emotional component. And when they feel like the economy's turning around, rates are a little bit lower, so I can now afford that payment, they want to jump in, right? They've been waiting to get out of the apartment, or they've been waiting to change locations in the country. I think that's the second component. Me personally, I think the next component that is going to affect the real estate market will actually be immigration, because based on the amount of inventory and the demand that's out there, I think immigration is going to have a key play in that based off labor. So,
okay. So, do you agree that the panel talked basically, hey, forget about ever seeing rates of 2% and 3%? Do you think that we're going to find a sweet spot, going forward for the next 10, 20 years of 5 to 6?
Yeah, I really do. I really think that next decade is fives. I think that 5 to 6 is really a spot where that's actually a better rate than historically we've had over the last 4 decades. You get into the fives, that's a pretty good rate historically. Now I will say this: I don't think that 2s and 3s are coming back with the asterisk. The only component on that that I believe is depending on how the Fed handles things and how the new administration handles immigration.
I'm very skeptical of, we haven't had any meaningful immigration legislation for 30, 40 years.
Yep.
My dad was part of that. He was able to become a citizen because of some of that, but that was in the 80s.
Right.
We're talking about there hasn't been anything meaningful in forever. So I'm just on a more of the skeptical side of that. Somebody's got to want to do it, and yep. I just don't see the fervor for it.
Well, and I think that's it's definitely going to be a tricky situation, but at some point somebody's got to be bold enough to stand up and do it, and it's not going away. That we keep kicking that can and it ain't going away, and we got to deal with it. So
yeah. Were you surprised at all about your question of energy? With how they responded? Were you surprised?
I am surprised that there aren't more people standing up in the aisle screaming and yelling about where we're at as a country with energy. There is, I will say this, I believe that there is absolutely zero chance of changing the basis of what materials and products and things cost if we don't address our energy crisis. It is physically impossible to lower the cost of products when we're still paying the amount that we pay to get them to a site. Case in point, Joey, I was talking to my dad 2 days ago. My dad's in his 80s, right? And I love my dad to death, love my parents to death, right? I talk to them every day. And my dad was all frustrated. Like, Dad, what's going on? He said, I went and bought bought your mom and I, our dinner, and I got us the same 2 hamburgers and a French fry that we share. And I couldn't believe it. It's so expensive. I said, how much was it? So it was $12 for 2 hamburgers and the fry. And I said, okay, Dad. He said, but Greg, he said, the thing was, he said, 5 years ago, that was $4.87. He said, I remember that because that's what I paid for years was $4.87 for the 2 hamburgers and a fry. And he said, what, is that cow that much more expensive right now? And it's not the cows, it's not the farmers. It's like, hey, everything we touch is driven by energy. Right? We can't get a tractor into the field to cut hay without using diesel fuel. Right? We can, it doesn't matter. Everything we touch is driven by fuel and energy. And if we don't fix that problem, we will never see our pricing structure of what things cost go down. So yeah, I have personally been surprised over the last several years and on the panel a little bit that people aren't screaming and yelling about energy, that we're just not yelling it from the rooftops. Fix this problem,
Now, one of the things, one of the best parts of I Survive Real Estate always is, talking to the attendees, the panelists throughout the night, in between, in the lobby, those great conversations. What type of feedback were you getting from the folks when you were there?
Well, I will say this. Everybody was so gracious. First of all, they were super excited about the transition. Everybody was very excited for me personally on the handoff of the company. And that was humbling, to see that. But during the event, I was really trying to focus on making sure that I did my role and did it to the best of my ability, right? And I even screwed up the process of bringing up the reason we're there, for Make-A-Wish, and I still screwed that up. But, in that aspect, Joey, I think the fact that I can just sit there and laugh at myself and not take myself too seriously, I hope that came across better than I came across.
Well, we could always blame it on Jimmy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Blame it on Jimmy. Jimmy, you know who you are.
That's right. When you forget the pledge of allegiance, come on. But honestly, afterwards, when I was speaking with people, I was there for 45 minutes or so afterwards, and without a doubt, the two things that everybody talked to me about that they were so excited for. They loved the investor panel. They said, Craig, it felt so real, and it felt like we could really garner really great information. Said, not that anything in the past wasn't good information. Said it was just different, and it came from a different point of view. The things they kept telling me is you were bringing out different points of view that made the information fresh and exciting.
I think it led to the most takeaways is what I think really people loved about it. They were able to get real takeaways that they can implement into their careers right now.
Right. And that was, listen, you and I were working until 9:00 the night before, making sure, is there anything I'm missing? Is there anything points I wanted to hit? Right. And I want to make sure that our events are relevant and provide value to everyone that walks through the door, whether they've never done their first deal or whether they got a $1 billion portfolio. It doesn't matter, right? Anywhere in between, I want to make sure that there's value and relevance out of all of our events that we do. And I that was the thing that I got out of it, is they were really pleased with how things were shifting, because it gave them the ability to get a lot of value out of what we did.
Do you think, we're almost close to wrapping it up. Do you think that 2025 will be a good year for real estate?
I really do. I really do. I believe, and this isn't about who was voted into office, right? I think there was the pent up energy of just everybody, like just the fact that the election year is over. We talked about that night, that what does the history show from election years is that, listen, there's always a bounce coming in, right? But I think that what was getting pent up in saved energy back there, with interest rates starting to tweak and creep down, I really believe that 2025 will be a year that we're going to look at and say, oh, wow, the last 2 years was actually the worst of it, and we made it, and we're already out of this. I believe it's going to be a great year.
All right. Well, I'm going to close the show, our little recap show, by just expressing my personal gratitude for always, first and foremost, especially with I Survive Real Estate, for Aaron Norris. He grew to be one of my best friends, and impacted the lives of so many others, just like his dad did. I want to thank Bruce for allowing Aaron to, talk him into this event. And then just grateful to everybody who still supports us, who still attends all of these events, that still listen to this show. So that's my personal gratitude. So Craig, I'd like to give you the opportunity to express, your gratitude also.
Yeah, as we're rounding out year one of me owning the Norris Group and what all that means and what it's meant, I am very humbled by the amount of people that, one, tune into the show to hear this old country boy from Georgia talk about, real estate and put their faith and trust in what I say. I'm honored and humbled by that, and I'm so excited looking towards 2025 with the things that we're looking to with DBL Unlimited and with the Norris Group. Specifically, there's so many great things that's coming, but it couldn't have happened without the transition of 2024. And I'm honestly, Joey, I'm honored that Bruce chose me to be his successor and take this company and lead it into the future, I'm honored that he chose me, and so I'm excited to finish out this year strong and to go headlong into the future of what we do as a company.
Craig, thank you for joining me as the host today, and thank you all for tuning in. We will see you next week.
For more information on hard money loans, trust deed investing, and upcoming events with the Norris Group, check out thenorrisgroup.com. For more information on passive investing through the DBL Capital Real Estate Investment Fund, please visit dblcapital.com.
The Norris Group originates and services loans in California and Florida under the California DRE license 01219911, Florida Mortgage Lender license 1577, and NMLS license 1623669. For more information on hard money lending, go to thenorrisgroup.com and click the hard money tab.